am not really into ghost stories or anything like that, but something happened to me last year that I still can't explain. I figured I had shared my experience and see if anyone out there has had similar experience like that. Last summer, I was working as a security guard at an old abandoned hospital on the edge of town. I had taken the job as a way to make some extra cash over the summer break from my university. The hospital had been shut down over for a decade, and it was known for being creepy and, well, a little bit haunted. I was never one to believe in ghosts, but working there was unsettling to say the least. The job was pretty straightforward. My main responsibility was to walk the hallway every couple of hours and make sure nobody was breaking in or messing around. I worked the night shift, which ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The building was huge, with 4 floors, and there were plenty of dark corners and empty rooms. One night, things took a turn for the eerie. I started my shift as usual, making my rounds and checking the security cameras. The hospital was silent as ever, and the only sound was the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the building and the windows cracking open in the wind. It was quiet, but it was a sort of unnerving quiet that made the hair on my back of my neck stand up. Around midnight, I was walking down the long, narrow hallway on the second floor when I noticed something strange. There was a door at the end of the hallway that had been locked, but now the door was slightly ajar, with just enough space to see into the darkness beyond it. I walked up to the door and pushed it open, half expecting to see something or someone in there. But there was nothing. The room was empty except for a few old dusty medical equipment scattered around in it. I checked the door's lock to make sure it was still intact, but everything seemed normal. I locked the door back up and continued on my rounds, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had started to creep in. A couple of hours later, while I was in the basement checking the storage rooms, I heard a strange noise coming from the stairwell. It was like a faint, echoing cry or a moan. I stood still for a few minutes, straining to hear it again, but it was gone, like it was never there. I walked up the stairs to investigate, but when I got to the landing, there was no one there, and nothing seemed out of place. The noise was so soft that I wondered if I had imagined it. I finished my rounds on the basement and went back up to the second floor. As I walked down the hallway again, I noticed the door at the end of the hall was ajar once again. My heart started to race. I knew I had locked it, but now somehow it was open. I took a deep breath and walked into the room, determined to check it out. The room was just as empty as before, but there was something off. It felt colder than the rest of the building. I shined my flashlight around and noticed a large old mirror on side of the room, but it was covered in dust, and the surface was so dirty that it was hard to see my reflection. I took a few steps closer to the mirror, and that's when I noticed something strange. In the dim light of my flashlight, I could see a shadow figure behind me in the mirror. It looked like a person standing there, but when I turned around, the room was empty. I spun back to the mirror quickly, but the shadow was gone, and I can see no one behind me in the mirror. I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light or imagination of my disturbed mind. But the chill in the room was undeniable. I walked out of the room and shut the door behind me, locking it as I went. I continued my rounds, but my nerves were shot. Around 4 a.m., I was sitting in the security office, watching the security feeds on the monitors, when I saw something that made me jump. On one of the cameras, which was positioned in the hallway where the mysterious room was, I saw a dark figure moving from one end of the hallway to other. It was just a shadow, but it was moving in a way that no one walked before. I rewound the footage and watched it again, but the figure was gone. It was like it had never been there in the first place. I was beginning to feel more than a little freaked out. I tried to call a friend to talk, but the old building had a terrible cell reception and I couldn't get through. The rest of the shift was a blur. I kept checking the hallway and the room, but nothing else ever happened. When 6 a.m. finally came, I was relieved to be done for the night. I walked out of the building as the sun began to rise, feeling a sense of both dread and relief. The next day, I decided to do a bit of research on the hospital. I wanted to find out if there was any history that might explain the strange things I had experienced. I went to the local historical society and dug through some old archives. I found out that the hospital had a dark past. During the 1950s, there had been a series of mysterious deaths among the patients. Some people believed that it was due to neglect, but others said that something more sinister might have been going on. The hospital had been closed after a scandal was left to decay over the years. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. I had always thought that ghosts were just stories, but the things I experienced that night made me question everything. I tried to tell my coworkers about what happened, but they just laughed it off as my imagination. I eventually quit the job. I couldn't handle the feeling of being watched and the eerie events that seemed to happen only when I was alone. I found another job, and though I still think about the night, I try not to dwell on it too much. Have any of you had similar experience in abandoned or old buildings? Share it here. Thanks for listening to my story.
Hello guys, if you like this kind of videos and want to hear more, consider subscribing to this channel and also check out other videos on this channel too. Like them, share them. Now, back to the story.
Hi there. I want to share something that happened to me a few years ago. I'm not really sure what to make of it, but it was one of the scariest things I have ever experienced in my life so far. A few years back, my family and I went to visit my grandparents. They lived in this really old house in a really small town, and it was always give me creeps. The house was huge, with creaky floors, long hallways, and a basement that was always locked. One night, I was staying over and decided to go to the bed early. I was in the guest room on the second floor, trying to fall asleep. The room was quiet, except for the occasional sound of wind blowing through the old windows. I had just closed my eyes when I heard it, a soft, dragging noise coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it might be the house settling in, or it was a small animal. But then I heard it again. It sounded like something heavy was being dragged across the floor. I tried to ignore it, but it kept going on and on. And it was like dragging was getting closer and closer to my door, then moving away again. I was too scared to get off the bed, so I just lay there, hoping it would stop. After a while, the noise stopped, and I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I even got up and checked the hallway, but there was nothing there. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake that feeling I was being watched. The next morning, I was still pretty shaken up. I mentioned the noise to my grandma, and she got really quiet. She told me that she had heard similar noises before, but didn't want to worry us kids. She said she thought it was probably the house too. That night, I tried to sleep, but I was on the edge the whole time. Around midnight, I heard the dragging noise again, but this time it was even louder, more persistent. I could hear it moving up and down through the hallway, just like before. I wanted to go downstairs to see if someone was up, but I was too scared to leave the room, even my bed. Finally, I managed to fall asleep, and the next morning I was so relieved to get out of the house. I didn't tell my grandpa or my parents about the noises because I didn't want them to freak out. But I never been able to forget that night. I'm still thinking about it sometimes and wonder what that noise was. Was it just an old house making noises, or was something there more sinister going on? I guess I will never know, but it was definitely an experience I wouldn't forget. Has anyone else had similar experience in an old house? I am curious to know if there are any explanation for these kind of things, or if I was just imagining things from the thin air. Hope you guys like these stories. If you did enjoy them, please consider subscribing to this channel. Check out my other videos, like them, share them, and don't forget to enable the bell icon. For more videos, stay tuned. And if you have any suggestions, please post them in the comment section. Till the next time, this is Malayali WENDIGO. Bye.